Cool. So hello, everyone. My name is Lady Marie Balilan. I am the Senior Chapter and Membership Development Associate here at OC National. So we have been doing this history webinar series throughout the year. This is our third one in the series. Our first one was covering Vincent Chin, the hate crime in 1982 that happened in Detroit, Michigan. Our second one was on the illegal annexation of Hawaii. And today we will be covering the Dotbusters, which was an outwardly racist hate group that targeted the Indian and South Asian community in the Jersey City area from the 1970s to the 1990s. So if you were joining us, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for taking the time to just kind of educate yourself, be a part of the conversation. I hope you are able to take something away today from it to kind of change your perspective and view the world differently, view our society differently, and view the South Asian American experience differently. So once again, I'd just like to thank you all so much for being here. And I do want to give a disclaimer that there will be words and names of Indian and South Asian descent that I will do my best to pronounce correctly, but I probably won't be perfect, so please excuse me if I do not do so. So yes, we can go ahead. Next slide. All right. So I'm just going to give a run through of the timeline that we will be having for today's webinar. So we'll talk about South Asian hate in America, where it started from, kind of where these sentiments started. So in the late 1800s, and we'll go into detail more about them as we continue on. So in the late 1800s is where the large presence of South Asians began in the US. In 1905, there was the Asiatic Exclusion League that started in the West Coast and of Canada and the US. And then 1906 was the Dusky Peril concept that, began. And then in 1907 was the Bellingham riots in Washington State. And then we'll go to the next slide. In 1923 was the United States v. Bhagat Singh Thind case. In 1975, the Dotbusters established. In 1987, their letter is published in the Jersey Journal. In 1987, also, very shortly after the letter was published, Navroz Modi is attacked into a coma and dies 4 days later. And 2 years after that, Modi's attackers are tried and never spend any jail time. So that was just a quick, very quick synopsis of what we'll be talking about in detail today. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So in the late 1800s, the South Asians come to America in search of opportunity and beginnings for their families, for their dreams and the American dream, right? So the earliest known South Asians from the regions of Bengal and Punjab are settled in North America. There are also Muslim Bengali peddlers who arrived in New Orleans, where they later integrated with communities of color in cities like Detroit, New York, and Baltimore. Simultaneously, migrants from Punjab, primarily Sikh men, made their way to the west coast of Canada in the British Columbia province. Many of these migrants still became the targets of anti-Asian sentiment and left Canada for the United States, creating communities along the Pacific Coast states. But even in the US, the living conditions for these migrants were just as difficult, and they were still victims of legal discrimination as well as violence from anti-Asiatic groups, which we will go further into. Men were also not allowed to bring their wives, and with interracial marriage with whites against the law, a significant number of Hindu and Muslim Punjabi men married Catholic Mexican immigrant women. Next slide. So now we will talk about the Asiatic Exclusion League. So this was initially the Japanese and Korean Exclusion League. This was formed, this organization was formed in the early 20th century between 1905 to 1907 in the US and Canada. In 1907, they changed to the Asiatic Exclusion League to include South Asians and Chinese immigrants. They advocated for, quote, white man's country. They set up branches throughout the Pacific coast and across the Canadian border. They pushed for the Chinese Exclusion Act and for it to include all other Asians. They aimed to spread false anti-Asian information and sway legislation to exclude Asian immigration. They had 5 pledges to Congress. So the first one was extending the Chinese exclusion laws to Japanese and Korean folks. The second was for members of Congress to pledge to not employ or patronize Japanese people. And the third pledge was to segregate Japanese students from white students in the Board of Education. The fourth pledge was to campaign and call attention to the president and Congress about this quote unquote menace taking over. And the fifth pledge of the Asiatic Exclusion League was that all labor and civic organizations in California are asked to contribute a fixed assessment of the quote unquote cause. So in San Francisco, in 1905, there was a mass meeting of European immigrant men and who blamed Asians for preventing them from owning homes and having a middle-class life. So now we're going to talk about the Dusky Peril. So that started in 1906. This term was a playoff or a spinoff of the term Yellow Peril. And this was first used in the Bellingham, Washington newspaper called the Puget Sound newspaper. It was meant to encapsulate the xenophobic worry of South Asians entering the country when only 17 South Asian individuals resided in the city. So even at that point, they already felt threatened. They already felt insecure and worried for their way of life, so to speak. In fact, the article byline of this article, which is in the box there on the news article, says, Bellingham workmen are becoming excited over the arrival of East Indians in numbers across the Canadian border and fear that the dusky Asiatics with their turbans will prove a worse menace to the working classes than the Yellow Peril that has so long threatened the Pacific coast. So it was this sort of sentiment that was played off or spun off of the Yellow Peril, which was the feeling of xenophobia and worry over East Asians coming into the country. And now, as soon as South Asians began to enter the country, they already have felt that threat. And the next slide. So this Dusky Peril sentiment brought on the 1907 Bellingham riots. So as soon as we see the Dusky Peril sentiment seen in the Bellingham newspaper, this brought on the riots. So on September 7, 1907, a mob of 400 to 500 white men of the Asiatic Exclusion League attacked the homes of South Asian Indians. Most of these people were Sikhs, but labeled as Hindus. The authorities were actually in cahoots or in accord with the mob by grouping the South Asian immigrants in City Hall for their quote unquote safety. The next day, 125 South Asians were ran out of their home and on the way to British Columbia. According to one report, 6 were hospitalized and none died. 100 were held in the Bellingham jail under protective custody, and 5 men were arrested but later released, and no one else was prosecuted. So we're going to fast forward to 1923. This is only about 20 years later. Less than 20 years later was the United States v. Bhagat Singh Thind case. So Bhagat Singh Thind was an Indian Sikh man who, after the US Army in World War I, after serving the US Army, was looking for citizenship through the Naturalization Act of 1906. The Nationalization Act of 1906 only allowed free white persons and aliens, quote, aliens of African nativity and persons of African descent to become US citizens. with the United States prevailing science at the time, Tind believed that he was eligible for citizenship as an Aryan or Caucasian. But because he wasn't white in the eyes of the common man, he was denied citizenship, and as were 50 other naturalized citizens of South Asian descent. So these were folks that were already granted citizenship, and with this case, have it removed from them or taken away from them. So this case really signified the way that this country viewed South Asians in America. And this obviously plays into the perpetual foreigner concept, where even if we serve in the army, even if we, have every right to be a citizen, to be a part of this country, in the eyes of the quote unquote common man or white man, they are not seen as belonging, or they're not seen as deserving of a citizenship or to be in this country. And then we go forward about 60 years later. This letter is published in the Jersey Journal, which is a local newspaper in Jersey City, in New Jersey. So it states, "I'm writing about your article during July about the abuse of Indian people. Well, I'm here to state the other side. I hate them. If you had to live near them, you would also. We are an organization called the Dotbusters. We have been around for 2 years. We will go to any extreme to get Indians to move out of Jersey City. If I'm walking down the street and I see a Hindu and the setting is right, I will hit him or her. We plan some of our most extreme attacks, such as breaking windows, breaking car windows, and crashing family parties. We use the phone books and look up the name Patel. Have you seen how many of them there are? Do you even live in Jersey City? Do you walk down Central Avenue and experience what it's like to be near them? We have, and we just don't want it anymore. You said that they will have to start protecting themselves because the police cannot always be there. They will never do anything. They are a weak race physically and mentally. We're going to continue our way. We will never be stopped." And even reading that out loud, everyone, was uncomfortable for me to say. So this was a very significant letter that was published in the newspaper. The origin of the name Dotbusters was a spinoff off of the bindi, or the dot worn on the forehead on most Indian or Hindu women and some men. And the Busters part was from the popular movie at the time, the Ghostbusters. So a very ignorant and very uneducated and discriminatory statement. And just to read these words, to see these words published in a local newspaper, in a public newspaper for folks to read, of the general public, I cannot imagine what South Asians were feeling and at this time in the community. So in order to remove what, to unlearn what the Dotbusters feel that they think is accurate in terms of the bindi. So we're gonna try to just talk about what the bindi actually means. So in Hindu culture, there are many psychic energy centers in the body called chakras. This derived, sorry. So bindi derives from the Sanskrit word bindu, which means point. And so among the chakras, one of them is called ajna, which is situated between the eyebrows. It's also known as the third eye. Meditating on ajna enables their human soul to see what their physical eyes cannot. It is meant to help you attain a higher level of consciousness and wisdom. Once you obtain wisdom from the third eye, your thoughts and actions are cleansed. So women wear bindi as a gesture of respect and protective covering of the divine spot. Women and men, I should say. It is also known to be worn as a signifier of a married woman. So this is just a moment of education and cultural understanding of, this is the significance of what the bindi is to the South Asian community, to the Hindu community, to the Indian community. And it's not just something to be, thrown around. It's something very of strong significance and beauty and divinity to this community. So we will go on to the next slide. So Shortly after the Dotbusters letter was published in September 27, 1987, Navroz Modi, who was age 30 at the time, was celebrating a job promotion in Hoboken, New Jersey with a coworker who was also non-Indian. He was becoming a manager at Citicorp in Manhattan. Later that night, he was ridiculed and attacked by youths on the street that led to a coma, and he died 4 days later. His non-Indian friend was not injured. There was an argument that it wasn't racially motivated, but like I said, his white coworker with him left the situation unharmed. So with what happened, the Indian American community definitely showed up for what happened. After the Dotbusters letter and Modi's death, the Indian American community responded in demanding law enforcement and state legislation to be stricter against biased and racially motivated crimes. These protests brought on the first legislation to protect people from biased crimes that led to its passing on to a national level. Since the Dotbusters letter, there were 24 violent assaults reported, 2 of which resulted in death and other several injuries. There were also 3 Indian-owned businesses that were forced to close because Indians were afraid to shop in Jersey City. And like I said, with the legislation, there were Indian leaders saying that, existing penalties for bias-related crimes offered only little protection against physical attacks because they only applied to destruction of property or threats of physical injury, which brought on the legislation on a state level and then a national level. So in 1989, the attackers were tried in court, and the Hudson County District Attorney, Paul DePasquale, denied that there had been any references to the victim's nationality. He said that it wasn't racially motivated. And in his opening argument, an assistant prosecutor asserted that it began with taunts about the victim being bald. But the family and other Indians state the nationality was obviously involved because his white coworker was left unharmed and not robbed from. The 4 that were charged with the murder of his death were Luis de Acevedo, who was 16, his brother William, Ralph Gonzalez, who was 18, and Luis Padilla, who was 17, all of Hoboken. The 2 suspects and 2 other youths, all under 18, were charged with homicide and released on bail. And Modi's mother said that her son was one of the mildest men in the world. He never in his life picked a fight. I'm going to try to speed through the next part. So here we go. Another significant case that happened after the Dotbusters letter was published was Dr. Kushal Sharon's attack. So 3 men, including one who became a Hudson County police officer, were indicted on federal civil rights charges in 1992 in the beating of Indian Dr. Kushal Sharon, who was 33 years old and was attacked 5 years prior in 1987. So they weren't even charged till 5 years later. The assault left the doctor in a coma for a week, hospitalized for a month, and suffered brain damage and memory loss to even fully recall the event. The indicted officer, Mark Evangelista, who was 23 years old at the time, was suspended without pay by the chief of his department, and shortly after the indictment was unsealed. So in between those 5 years of the attack and his charge, Officer Evangelista joined the Hudson County Department in May 1990. In between, that was about 2.5 years after Dr. Sharon was beaten. It is said that Officer Evangelista did have a background check, and before hiring, they found, quote unquote, nothing negative. So it just goes to show the law enforcement's very soft and feathered perspective of their response in these situations. The 2 other suspects, both Jersey residents, were Thomas Kozak, a 22-year-old security guard, and Martin Riccardi, a 26-year-old truck driver. This was a 2-count indictment that accused all 3 men of beating Dr. Sharon in an attempt to interfere with his rights to use the sidewalks of Jersey City and his rights to live there. But in the end, there was a Mr. Kozak was arrested at his home in the morning, pleaded not guilty in the afternoon, and then was released on a 50,000 bond, and the other attackers were acquitted. And those two are just like two numbers out of the other various attacks of people being egged in their homes, thrown metal, having racial epithets shouted at them. And so Vishnu Patel, who was another Indian community leader, said that people are afraid to go out, and those people who work nights or return late at night are not going to their jobs. They're scared. So folks, that is the very condensed history timeline of the kind of fear that the Dotbusters and other anti-South Asian hate groups and people in general had. And this was kind of the world that the Indian Americans and South Asian Americans at the time go through then and continue today. So to bring on, I'd like to continue the conversation, I'd like to bring on today's two speakers. Professor Balmurray Natarajan of William Patterson University in New Jersey. And I would also like to welcome State Commissioner Upendra Chivukula, also on the stage. Hello, hello.
Hi, lady. Great presentation.
Hi, everybody.
Very short time.
So glad. Yes,
definitely. You packed a
definitely.
punch there, lady.
Thank you so much to you both for being here. I'm just going to give you a moment to kind of introduce yourself. Murli, if you would like to go first.
Sure. So hi, everybody. My name is Balmurray Natarajan. I'm a professor of anthropology at William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey, a public institution for a very, very diverse student population. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Upendra Chivukula, currently a commissioner on the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, former state legislator, served in the assembly for 13 years, and I was also served as councilman and mayor of Franklin Township.
Awesome. Well, I'd truly just love to thank you both for being here and giving this perspective as, you know, members of the South Asian community and also as members of, you know, of citizens of New Jersey. So to start off, I just wanted to ask, you know, the first question, how would you compare this sort of sentiment in New Jersey when the Dotbusters were more active to how it is now? Do you feel that there's a difference? What was your experience from almost, you know, I want to say 30, 40 years ago until now?
Well, the way I look at it is that the number of South Asians has increased, especially in New Jersey. It's a large number. So I think that's one thing. And also congregation. There are a lot of neighborhoods. We have what's called a Little India, the Oak Tree Road sections of Edison and Iselin of Woodbridge. And so there are a lot of shops and people see that. And then also in the IT profession after the Y2K and the H1 visa, and a lot of programmers and software developers have come from India. And there is a lot of many changes that have taken place. Along with the changes also brought more hatred, you know, or hidden bias, because they're looking at South Asians as taking away their jobs and livelihood and all that. And so, especially with respect to the H1 visa, and South Asians tend to work very hard and try to invest. They want to become middle class very fast, invest in the house and cars and all that. I think so that also brings that visibility. And there's also a projection of South Asians saying that they're model minority because their education levels and they are able to per capita income, all those things put in a very spotlight. And so that brings naturally dislike and prejudice and hate crimes. I think so it is if you look at some of the statistics, there was an article in India West recently. I saw that the hate crimes against Hindu Americans has jumped by 500%, and
Wow.
just from 2% in 2019 to 11 in 2000. Even though percentage is high, but the numbers are, and then FBI logged about 15 hate-motivated attacks against Buddhists in 2020, and Muslim Americans and Sikh Americans and Indian Americans, and they have gone through a lot of prejudice over a period of time.
Mm.
I'd just like to add a few things to what Upendra was saying. I think the first thing to bear in mind is that South Asia is an extremely diverse population.
Yes.
And so it is, the South Asia as a part of the world itself encompasses several nations, but in its immigrant quality too, the diversity is immense. Also, economic inequality is also high. So there are enough South Asian populations that are actually living in poverty. At the same time, as Upendra pointed out, as a group, and this is the problem with aggregate statistics, as a group, median income is extremely high, probably the highest of most ethnic groups, along with maybe Jewish population. And the entire South Asian population in the US is, probably less than 1%. And something like that. But within that, I just wanted to point out those variations. The second thing is there were several waves of immigration, and that too makes a difference because, for example, the most latest waves have been after the 1965, the Lyndon Johnson policies that allowed families to come in the Immigration Act of 1965. After that time, a good chunk of the South Asians coming were professionals. It started off with the nurses and the physicians, and then you had graduate students coming in already with degrees, so coming for grad school and then staying back, and then after the 2000s and 1990s, you had H-1B visas with highly qualified IT folks coming. However, before 1965, you had a bunch of other folks who are already come here. So for example, there are taxi drivers in New York and New Jersey who are from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, and from India. They are Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs, and others. There are also workers in restaurants, motels, the obviously ubiquitous and almost idiomatic but stereotypical 7-Elevens, the gas station pumps. So there are all kinds of people. At the same time, after 1970s, there was an exodus from East Africa of a lot of Gujarati, especially Indians, who came as a business class, and then they set up businesses here. And one has to take into account all of that variation, and then ask the question: how does racism impact each class differently? Because every class then has its own ways of protecting itself or being vulnerable. So the poorer you are, the more vulnerable you are, but all, whether you're rich or poor, get racialized. Everyone in some way or another gets racialized. So I would make it in that kind of a way. And my last point is this: I think there are differences in the ways that racism has found a reason to come out. So in the 1970s, as you rightly pointed out with the Dotbusters, that was the thing. But today the dot is not as triggering of a symbol. And I want to say it very cautiously. It's not as triggering of a symbol as it used to be at that time. And there are other triggers. And some of that has to do with post 9/11, where one of the earliest people to be killed was a Sikh, Balbir Singh Sodhi, who was mistaken to be a Taliban because of his turban. So there's a lot of misrecognition based on ignorance, but it also is fueled by some form of lack of understanding of other cultures. And then you had a whole host of Sikhs as well as Muslims being targeted. And then I think it was in 2017, probably, after the 2008 crash in the economy, then people started having more ideas about IT people. And that was when another young man, Srinivas Kochi Botla, he was a Hindu, and he was murdered in Kansas City. And in all these cases, for example, the person who murdered Srinivas Kochi Botla thought that they were Iranians and he wanted them to go back to their country. Someone else thought someone else was a Muslim and things like that. But the idea is to not say, hey, I'm not a Muslim or I'm something like that, is to stand in solidarity. And I think that is a challenge.
Yes. That is a great point, Murli. I feel that there's just so much, you talked about the data aggregation of, the South Asian community. There's just it's so vast and it's so intricate and detailed. And I feel like our education system has not really taken the time to really distinguish the differences and distinguish, that this conglomeration or in like just putting into a box of just the entire community that is so widely just from different backgrounds. It's so important to create those distinctions, not only for our own education, but for the safety of people in general. It's obvious that the Dotbusters letter in the Jersey Journal made a huge difference. It kind of brought this uproar of this anti-South Asian sentiment. How would you compare that to today's power of words with social media, with our constant influx of information and stimulus all the time? What difference would you say that the Dotbuster letter made then, and the difference that all this media makes now today?
So one of the interesting things Murli said about that South Asian population, they're not all well-to-do. There are a lot of people who are struggling. If you go to a gas station or in restaurant workers and working in the shops, and they're not all wealthy, and there are tremendous healthcare disparities. COVID-19 has pointed out some of the challenges that South Asians and the poor end have faced. And I think what right now, what is going on in terms of visibility, as Murli said, that DOT is not actually, DOT may be helping you being mistaken for a Muslim if there is an anti-Muslim feeling. So that's not the only symbol. There are other symbols in that. Accent is one of the things. When you are an immigrant here, you speak many languages that gives away that you are not. For example, my son was born in New York City, and probably by looking at him, they think that he is not American. So it's going to take a long time, for us to integrate into, for example, Europeans, they come here within a generation, they become part of the mainstream. So we have that big challenge that we have to deal with. And I think it's like a pizza pie. When the pie gets smaller, everybody is going to start fighting for that. And then they start pointing out fingers at people. And that brings out a lot of xenophobic reactions. And people say, oh, these people are taking our jobs. And, in 2002, 92 and 3, that time frame, when I was in the state legislature, and one state legislator wanted to put a bill and saying that we don't want to do outsourcing, and then mentioned India in particular. I said, why India? Because there are, outsourcing is happening from Ireland and other countries. And her reaction was that, what are they going to do? They're going to stop me from going to India, deny me a visa. So that type of insensitivity, even elected officials tend to have that. And Congressman Mike Honda, he tried for many sessions, congressional sessions, trying to get a Asian American health care disparities legislation, and he was not successful. So there are, that's why we need to not only look at the negative aspect of hate crimes and all that, but I think that should bring all of us together, Asian Americans, South Asians, that come together and speak out. And I think that's very important.
Great point, Ubendra. And I do want to echo it and deepen it if I can to answer your question, lady. I feel we should also not underestimate what has happened over the last 4 or 5 years in this country. So we've had a explosion in a sense, and I do not like using war terms, but unfortunately the language is filled with war metaphors. But we've had something that just exploded, and that had something to do with taking us back to that letter that you put up of the Dotbusters. White supremacy, white nationalism is out in the open. And that, for people like me, I've been in this country, I keep telling my students, I've been in this country longer than many of my students have been on earth. And that has a very specific reason behind it, because mostly people, when they see someone like us, they say, where are you from? And then I say, I'm from Iowa. And they say, no, where are you really from? I say, well, I've been here 30 years. How much further you want me to go? All of us ultimately are from East Africa. That's where the human species evolved from. And we need to understand that every immigrant group that comes into this country, in one way or another, is taught to be anti-Black. So if we start from that understanding, we need to then understand that the structural forms of racism actually helps to keep us from coming together. Every immigrant group shares certain experiences of racism, racialization, loss of a sense of identity, belonging, and it's in varying degrees, as I said. What social media has done is allow a free rein for all forms of hate to be just spread with impunity, because people hide behind Twitter handles and things like that. And for the first time, I would say, one is really thinking very, very seriously about how none of our education, none of our wealth can actually protect you and keep you safe in any way unless we collectively address the issue of white nationalism, which should make a distinction that most whites are not white nationalists. Just like most Hindus are not Hindu supremacists, most Christians are not Christian supremacists, most Muslims are not Muslim supremacists, and so on and so forth. If we fail to do something like that, I would say we are going to be in a very tough situation where then something like the model minority myth, which is attached to some South Asians, but also some East Asians, is usually used to drive a wedge and forgets the history of immigration that allowed highly qualified people with degrees, with cultural capital to come, and then you start comparing them to people with 400 years of slavery as a history or complete non-access to any resources. We are in a bad shape that way. My last point is this. It's quite telling that the people, now I forget the details, but Navroz Modi, the folks who were caught, I mean, many of them were Hispanic. So we shouldn't think in terms of white versus black or white versus Asians and so on and so forth. There's also other forms of complicated relationships. Much of that has to do with local experiences, but built upon global stereotypes or national stereotypes.
Thank you so much, Upendra and Marley. Those are all such great points. It's really important to, I think, in so much, the concepts that are really a common theme is that the model minority myth, the perpetual foreigner myth, and white supremacy, white nationalism. That is a common theme throughout, when we see these hate crimes, when we see these wrongful sentiments in communities, that is the main common theme throughout all communities. And it's important to remember that, someone in the chat said to not throw groups under the bus. We have to remember the true source and where this is all really coming from, and stand in solidarity with that. It's to not, try to pit us against each other, but it's really about coming together against the actual source of, where all of this is coming from. So thank you for that. I'm so glad we brought all of this up. My next question is that, I definitely see a similarity of slow law enforcement response and feathered convicting of attackers with Vincent Chin in 1982 and with Navroz Modi and more in 1987 and onwards. Why do you think these crimes are not being taken seriously? And what is something that we can do as communities, as organizations to fix that? Oh, Upendra, you are muted.
Yeah, one of the things as part of the 1990 legislation, we wanted to have the police, law enforcement to make a note on the case that it is a hate crime. And a lot of the times that gets missed. So we must try to, we must ensure that the law enforcement categorizes like that. That's very important. And also, I think we have to take part in public life. I think participate locally. After 1987, Modi got killed, and I started doing a lot of voter registration, and all that led on to my working on different campaigns and getting elected as a councilman. When I was running for office, they said, why is this Indian running here? They should be running in India. That's what they were saying. But anyway, I was able to get elected because, as Murali said, that most people are not like that. But there are always bad apples in the thing. And then when I became a state legislator, I saw the hate crimes against the Sikhs. So I introduced, working with the Department of Education, introduced a curriculum, one chapter about Sikhism. And I had several meetings with the members from the Sikh community, with the Attorney General, several, and try to have sensitivity training to law enforcement officers, so that way they can be sensitive to Sikh Americans. I think like that, we need to take part. And if we are spectators, like that's what they said, if you're not at the dinner table, you are on the menu. So we want to make sure we are part of the action, and we need to because the stereotype about Asian Americans, they're interested in their own lives, they make money, and they're happy with whatever. For South Asian, they say they watch television, watch some Hindi movies and things like that. But I think we need to give some of our time back to the community, and we have to be visible in the community. I think that's what is, we can take a step towards that.
Fully endorse what Upendra has has said we just need to get better at being civically engaged, being publicly visible. And that's the only ways in which certain cases are picked up and given the care and attention that they need to be. So I don't have much else to add for that.
Yes, 100% agree with Upendra and Murli here. It really is about being at the table. I've never heard that quote, Upendra, but it made me laugh, but it's true. If we're not at the table, folks will not understand us. They will not see us. They will not really consider us as part of of this community. And it's on us to be the ones to step forward and kind of, if no one does it, no one's who will. So it's important that at least the one person to representation is so important in our government, in our local communities, just to know that, to remind people that we do belong here, that we do deserve rights, and we have rights to be here, and it's important to exercise those rights. And that education. I'm so happy to hear that, Upendra, you put in this effort to bring that education to your local communities on Sikhism and to bring that to your community. That is so great to hear, and that's something that here at OCA we really try to push forward, to have that education as well. So
lady, one more thing I want to add.
Yes.
Is that in the state legislature, I brought the lion dance to the floor of the assembly. I got people from the community do the lion dance there. And I also brought the Sikh community to celebrate Baisakhi in the assembly chambers, which has never been done before. And I pushed for world languages, and I think that is another important thing, that we are able to say that it's not one language, English, but there was a push for English only. America is English only. That was a movement for some time, and by adding so many languages, we are really making the America richer. And I think those are the types of things. Because I was elected official, I was able to work on that. And if I were not elected official, I don't know whether that would have been possible.
Wow. Yeah. And it really shows how much of a difference it makes. So just thank you so much for serving your community in that way. So I think my last question before we go on to the resources and then the Q&A portion. So folks, please feel free to ask Murli and Upendra any questions that you may have regarding everything that we've talked about today. Use the Q&A portion feature on the bottom of your Zoom, or just ask in the chat, however it is for you. Feel free to bring in those questions for Murli and Upendra here. But so the last thing I wanted to ask you, so what is something that you would like folks in the audience to know about the South Asian community that you feel isn't known enough?
Yeah, just want to say that a lot of, even in the Asian community, a lot of people think that South Asian country means there are Patels, and that's not true. Because even if you look at the Jersey Journal letter, it is Modi is also a from Gujarat, and so there are 22 different states in India, and and then you have Pakistan, you have Bangladesh, you have Sri Lanka, you have Nepal and Sikkim and Bhutan, and all these countries are there. And this is not a monolithic society. There are so many different languages, different cultures within the culture, and people need to understand that. I think as Asian American, we should learn about each other. And so when in my political journey, first thing I did was I learned about all of India. Then I learned about Chinese. I learned about Korean Americans and Vietnamese. Like that, I learned, and I led some organizations like that, and educated myself so that way I can talk about those things forcefully with other communities. I think that's a lot of times we don't know. We only know a little bit about ourselves. Yeah, I think that is a very important thing for me. I think that's one.
It is clearly the most important thing anyone should know about, not just the South Asian community, but about any other community, that it is usually far more diverse than we think it is. We tend to acknowledge diversity within our own communities. So we say, no, 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 I'm not really like that other person down the road who also looks like me. But then when we look at some other community, we homogenize from afar. Okay, I think that's the single most important thing. And what that means then is that we should be a little bit careful about stereotyping others, because we are constantly fighting other people's stereotypes of ourselves. I've taken students to India several times, and I ended up understanding my own role to be as some kind of a cultural translator, of course, but also battling stereotypes of my students of India, which is a huge 1.4 billion people, and also stereotypes of several people in India of my students and Americans. So we transact in stereotypes as if there is no better way to relate to each other, and that's terrible. The best way to start understanding each other is to make some friends across your comfort zone, and then be careful in judging. Everybody is complex at the personal level, but even groups are complex. I want one other thing for people to understand outside the South Asian community. South Asian community itself probably forgets its own history sometimes. We also have a revolutionary history in this country, in the diaspora. For example, in 1914, there was a party that was formed in San Francisco called the Ghadar Party. Ghadar means rebellion or revolution in a number of different languages. And they were an anti-colonial party. And there are traditions that have continued over the last 100 odd years within the South Asian community that has at least some sections of the community very progressive, wanting to be in solidarity with all social justice causes, and working as allies, at the same time fighting racism that characterizes and meets any person of color who comes into this country. So I want the youth especially to understand that South Asia is probably no different. South Asians are no different from other communities in the sense that it's a wide range of political orientations, economic inequality, and people like Upendra, who have jumped into public life. He's one of the earliest folks from the South Asian community to actually hold public office, and he's a example for younger folks to follow.
Yes, thank you both for such valuable information and wisdom. It's very true. I think, oh, Pendra, did you want to say something? Are you just muted? Okay, I'll just say that it says so much to put in the effort, to put in the time, to, how Upendra said, to learn, to take the time to really educate yourself, and Murli's talking about, making friends, to dismantle the stereotypes and the biases that you have from wherever it may be, from social media, from your environment, from, other ignorant people around you that you may not even know. So it's important for us to put in the effort to humble ourselves and to know that, we are not the only community, that not everything is about what we know or what we think we know. So I will add too, as we're learning that, that as you're going through the information that you're taking in, like sometimes there is a resistance to unlearn your biases, and it can be hard, but the outcome when you push through any resistance to dismantle your stereotypes and unlearn, it's so much more beautiful, it's so much more fruitful, because your world opens up to people that you may not have had the ability to know before. So everything that Murli and Upendra are saying, I just wanted to add to that really quick. So
yeah, one thing, lady, I just want to say that I just remembered one thing. One black minister, one time he asked me, Upendra, how come there are no Indians in the prisons? I was shocked. I said, how? I quickly said, maybe Pastor, you are looking in the wrong prisons. I told you this.
Oh my goodness.
What I'm saying, I mean, people, they have certain images and say, how come you don't have? And I think it's that's the wrong question. Again, United States of America, I look at that as United Diversities of America. So we have so many cultures, not just South Asian or Asian or African or European. They're all coming and blending together, and that makes this country great. And we have to remind the people that everybody is an immigrant in this society, except for the Native Americans who are called Indians, by the way. So
that's true. Thank you so much, Upendra, for bringing that up. Thank you for this conversation. We still have more to go. So we're going to quickly go through the resources really quick. So I'm going to bring on OCA National's VP of Education and Culture, Emilio Manuel Camus, to talk about what we can do as an audience or as just folks in community to be there for our South Asian and South Asian American brothers and sisters in community. So if we could have the slide up, and Emilio, take it away.
Yes. Perfect. As you can see, everyone, there are different resources and ways that you can support the South Asian community. Oh, I think, there you go.
Oh, there it is.
And the first is definitely supporting South Asian and South Asian American-led organizations, including SALT, the South Asian Americans Leading Together, SALDEF, which is the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, SADA, which is the South Asian American Digital Archive, the Muslim Advocates, Sikh Coalition, and more. Second, you can educate yourself. South Asian countries and South Asian American communities and cultures are so much more vast than we realize, or American education allows. We can help dismantle misconceptions, stereotypes, and appropriation by putting in the efforts to learn and unlearn. Third, take bi-center intervention training. Register for our monthly that's being hosted every month, and this month is being hosted sometime in a couple of weeks, but you can equip yourself with tangible strategies and tools when facing real-life bystander situations. Finally, support Asian, American, and ethnic studies locally. Vote for a K-12 and college curriculum that truly includes the history that all Asian Americans, especially South Asian, have contributed to this country.
Thank you, Emilio. Yes, so folks, feel free to use these resources and, put in the effort to learn, to unlearn, to educate yourself, and to take action for our South Asian community. So if I think we have a few questions in the chat, I'm not sure. I know I saw one. So I'd like to bring up Upendra and Murli up again to turn on their cameras. So we can answer this question. And if anyone has any other questions that they've had, I know this was a lot of information. So if anyone feels like they have something that they wanted to ask Murli and Upendra, please use the Q&A portion down there and or the chat, either one. But we have just a few minutes left. So for our first question, which federal legislations are harmful to the Indian and South Asian community that we can bring more awareness about through our advocacy work at local chapters?
Oh, I know, where do I begin? There are some legislation with respect to immigration. I think immigration is such an important for South Asians, especially Indian Americans. I think there are a couple of legislations. I was not prepared for the legislation number. I think we need to get that. Under President Biden, I think they're trying to remove the backlog. One thing I remember, I speaking one time, some people, there's a waiting period of 92 years. So I said, Indians do believe in reincarnation, but they would like to get their green card this lifetime. So like that, there's, I think the backlog is a major issue, and the country-based, their separation, what happens to that, countries like India, Pakistan, and all that, they get pushed to the side because there's more demand from those countries than other countries. So I think they need to have some kind of a balance. Look at the if their immigration is based on talent, they should not be separating that. I think I don't have exact legislation numbers, I think we should look at that. Yeah.
Riley, did you want to add anything?
Like Upendra, I don't have anything particular, but if people would like to send me an email at some point, I could really help out on that. I think that's an important one. My own general position would be look at foreign policy, look at labor laws, and things related to both of these definitely impact the South Asian community here. And part of the problem is that, as we know right now, that entire region is reeling from the aftermaths of the 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. And so people are worried and concerned, rightfully. And Afghanistan is actually a part of South Asia. We tend to think of it as if it's not. So some things to do with foreign policy is always on the cards, and something to do with labor regulations are also possible for advocacy. But I've had a pleasure attending this. I'm unfortunately going to have to leave. I have another meeting.
Thank you so much for joining us, Riley. Your presence and wisdom meant so much to us, and just thank you for your time.
You are most welcome, and I wish this organization all its best. And Upendra, what a pleasure being with you on the panel. I need to come and meet with you.
Thank you, Murali. Same here, same here.
Yes.
So yes, we'll let Murali go because he does have to
Okay.
ask, but thank you again, Murali, for being here. Upendra, if you wanted to
All right.
stay, if anyone
Take
has
care.
any other questions, take care.
And thank you,
again.
audience.
Thank you. Bye.
Upendra, if you wanted to stay and,
Yeah, I
answer
will
a few
stay
more
on.
questions.
I'll stay on. If there are questions, for a few more minutes, I could definitely do that.
Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions? If not, that's okay. We can definitely give out their contact, Upendra, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
If you have any future contacts or questions, there are some other events that we do want to let folks know about. So last chance on questions. All right. Upendra, thank you so much for just being here as well. Your service to the community means so much to AAPIs, to South Asians, and you've made a difference. I can just truly say that you have, in all of your years of service. You have definitely made a difference to your community. So I just really wanted to thank you and just wish you luck on all of your future contributions to your community in New Jersey. I myself grew up in New Jersey, so it just meant so much to me to know that we have folks like you in our community and our government, just advocating for South Asians and for Asians in general. So just wanted to thank you so much.
Thank you, lady. And I want to thank the Organization of Chinese Americans for Asian Pacific Americans trying to do this service. I think it's very important. I did receive an award from OCA. I am grateful for that. And I think we are all in it together. And my friend Virginia Ng always says, if you one chopstick you cannot break, you can break, but if you have multiple chopsticks, you cannot break. There is tremendous strength in the unity, and so we need to unite, learn about each other. We need to unite, and then keep fighting for justice. No matter, injustice is not. It's not, as Dr. Martin Luther King said. It's not the. It's the silence of the many, not the actions of the few. I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Upendra. Your presence meant so much to us here at OCA.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Signing off. All right.
So we will still, I just want to give some last announcements for our events coming up. There are also a lot of events in other South Asian organizations that I just wanted to promote really quick. I know we're like a little bit late on time. It's actually happening right now, but for SALT, is the South Asian Americans Leading Together. They're having a process 20 years since, and we are putting registration links in the chat. And then later on after that, at 3 p.m. Is in memory of 9/11. That's being given by the South Asian Bar Association. And then I do have other events that I forgot to put on the slide itself. But on the 16th at 8:30, SOLDEF is having Make Us Visible. And then on September 20 at 8:30, which is I think that's there. SOLDEF is having the 9/11 Relive, Reflect, and React. So that is at 8:30. So there's a lot of events going on, obviously. So we have a few today. We have some on the 16th and some on the 20th. So links are in the chat if you do want to support your South Asian American organizations. But I just wanted to thank everyone for their attendance today. These history webinars have been so fun and just having such amazing and fruitful conversations. Be sure to head to ocanational.org/AAPI-history-webinar for more information on the future ones, and follow all of our social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook for more updates on the upcoming last webinar of the series, where we will be focusing on Southeast Asian communities. So be sure to be on the lookout. I just want to thank you all again for your presence. Thank you again to Upendra and Murli, who took the time to speak with me today and to speak with all of us today. And I hope that we all took away something of importance to help us grow and be better advocates for one another. So I hope you have a great day and take care, be safe, and have a good one. Bye.